Yes, looks like we're live.
Almost. I think it's
Okay.
once the orange bar is on, we'll be good to go.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Planning Commission of June 2nd, 2020. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our recording secretary, Jen Chavez. Jen?
Thank you. Hi, good evening. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining tonight. Prior to roll call, the Assistant City Attorney is going to make an announcement to the Planning Commission regarding the teleconferencing of this meeting. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Assistant City Attorney Alicia Poon.
Thanks, Jen. Prior to roll call, I would like to make clear for the record of this meeting, and it should be reflected in the minutes, that the governor has issued 2 executive orders relaxing the requirements pertaining to remote meetings under the Brown Act. To facilitate social distancing and to slow the spread of coronavirus pandemic, the executive orders authorize state and local legislative bodies, including this commission, to hold public meetings by teleconference more easily. The order took further steps to make public meetings accessible to the public via electronic means, including telephone. These provisions will remain in effect during the period in which state or local public health officials have imposed or recommended social distancing measures. The order allows the commission to proceed with its members participating electronically or telephonically. Commission members are no longer required to be physically present in the meeting in order to participate or to establish a quorum. The local agency must provide a means for the public to observe the meeting and provide the public an opportunity to comment electronically or telephonically. The opportunities for public observation and participation must be and have been included in the meeting notice. The procedures adopted for this meeting have been established to meet or exceed the standards set forth in the order. For more information, please refer to Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N-25-20. Madam Recording Secretary, it would now be appropriate for you to conduct roll call, after which I would ask the chair to recognize me in order to confirm certain matters for the record. Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. All right, so item 2 is roll call. Commissioner Frank.
Good evening, I'm present.
Thank you. Commissioner Kuznick.
I am here, present.
Thank you. Commissioner Marks.
Here.
Vice Chair Wallace.
I'm here.
And Chair Alpert.
Here.
Thank you.
Alicia?
Thank you, Chair Alpert. I would now like to request that the chair, the vice chair, and commission members respond to a few questions. If you can hear me well, please indicate in the affirmative by physically raising your hand. See, 1, 2, 3. Yep. Okay. See all of you. Thank you. If you have been able to hear all previous speakers, including the roll call, clearly, please indicate in the affirmative by physically raising your hand. Okay. See everybody. And I would next request that any commission members speak up at this time if you have reason to believe, based on facial or voice recognition or otherwise, that any person representing themselves to be a commission member is not truly so. Okay. Hearing no comment, the record will reflect that each commission member present is satisfied that every commission member participating by teleconference is who they say they are. And finally, I would like to advise the chair and the commission members and the recording secretary that any votes taken during this meeting must be taken by roll call. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. At this time, I'd like to ask the recording secretary to lead the commission in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thanks, Gary. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so item 4, moving on here, is public comments or written communication. If you wish to speak on a public comment or regarding an agenda item, please click the raise your hand button on your computer. You can press *9 on your telephone to request to speak when public comment is being taken on the agenda item. You will then be unmuted when it's your turn to make your comment for up to 3 minutes. After the allotted time, you will be remuted. At this time, those who wish to address the Planning Commission on any item not already included in tonight's agenda can do so now. And I can give it just a moment.
Okay, great. Do we have any written comments submitted, or anybody's raised? Don't see any hands raised
No,
at this
we
point.
actually do not have any written communication at this time. I haven't received anything, so
Okay, is
and it
anybody?
looks like we don't have any commenters on the attendees side. So
Okay, I don't see any hands raised at this point, so we'll give just a couple seconds more. If somebody wishes to raise their hand, we're all getting comfortable with the virtual, but we'll give it a couple seconds. Okay, doesn't look like any, so we'll go ahead and move on. Okay, thank you, Jen.
So thank you. Item 5 is additions and revisions. We do not have any tonight. Item 6 is consent calendar. Item 6.1, City of San Ramon's draft fiscal year 2020-21 through fiscal year 2024-25 capital improvement program for general plan conformance.
Okay, so this is a consent item, and I think we have Amy. You're with us today? I think I see you there on the screen. You know, is there anything you wanted to say to us tonight about the? I know this is a consent item, and it's the 5-year capital plan. And if you want us to make any comments to get started, or if you're looking for any feedback, if we have any feedback from the commissioners at this point, or
through the chair, if I might, this is items on the consent calendar. It can be moved with a motion without discussion.
That's fine. Okay, so if there's no discussion whatsoever, we'll go ahead and look for a motion to move this to the commission, I believe, or the council. Is that correct? Right.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move adoption of resolution number 06-20.
Second.
Okay. Moved by Commissioner Marks, seconded by Vice Chair Wallace.
Okay, I'll go ahead and conduct a roll call vote. We'll go ahead and start with Planning Commissioner Marks, who was our mover.
Aye.
Vice Chair Wallace, who seconded the motion.
Aye.
Planning Commissioner Frank.
Aye.
Commissioner Kuznick.
Aye.
And Chair Alpert.
Aye.
All right, thank you. The motion passes 5-0. All right, moving on, we have item 7 is approval of minutes. Item 7.1, minutes from the May 19th, 2020 regular Planning Commission meeting.
Okay. Are there any comments, discussions, questions on the minutes? Seeing none, may we have a motion to accept as written?
So moved.
Okay.
Seconded.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Marks, seconded by Commissioner Kuznick.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do another roll call vote. So we have Planning Commissioner Marks, who moved.
Aye.
Seconder, Commissioner Kuznick.
Aye.
Commissioner Frank.
Aye.
Vice Chair Wallace.
Aye.
And Chair Alpert.
Aye.
All right, the motion passes 5-0. And we're going to move on now to item 8, continued items after closing of public hearing. Doesn't look like we have any tonight. Item 9 is continued items, open public hearing. Item 9.1, continued public hearing, draft Crocanian specific plan update, and the staff report is provided by Cindy Yee, Senior Planner.
Hi there. Thank you. Good evening. We welcome the opportunity to be before you this evening to conduct our second public hearing on the Crocanian specific plan. This evening, we have a PowerPoint presentation, which Andrew Hill from Diet and Bhatia will provide for the commission. And I will go ahead and share my screen so that we can all view the PowerPoint together. And Andrew will walk us through the PowerPoint. So I can go ahead and start with sharing my screen, and we'll have Andrew walk you through the presentation.
Thank you, Cindy. I'll just wait for the PowerPoint to show up on the screen. Wait a moment.
Okay.
There we go. So thank you very much. If you could go to the next slide, please. So good evening, everyone. Tonight is a continuation of the public hearing on the draft Crocanian specific plan. And I have a quick presentation to orient you all for that. I'd like to quickly recap the key updates that have been made to the plan to go over some responses to requests that the commission made on May 19th, and then to talk quickly about next steps in the process. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the hearing tonight is to allow for additional public input on the draft plan and also to receive additional feedback from the commission. Thanks. Next slide, please. In terms of orientation, the Crow Canyon specific plan covers a 135-acre area in the northwest portion of the city. The plan was originally adopted in 2006, but the council directed a targeted update to the plan in view of a number of changing circumstances that have occurred since 2006. And those include the disruption of the retail sector caused by the rise of internet shopping, the loss of redevelopment agencies as a funding tool for redevelopment, and a raft of new housing law implemented at the state level. Thanks. Next slide, please. So over the past 18 months, staff and the consultant have worked to update the plan based on the decision maker direction. We started with a review of existing conditions. We then developed and evaluated a series of different alternatives for land use, circulation, and design in the area. And once a preferred alternative was approved, we worked to update the narratives, the standards, and the policies in the plan to produce the draft that's before you all tonight. Next slide, please. The City of San Ramon has established a review process for specific plans that requires that they are adopted or amended in the same way as the general plan. Measure G requires subsequent amendments to the general plan to be adopted by a 5-4 vote of the City Council after a recommendation in favor of such amendments is made by a 5-4 vote of the Planning Commission, following a minimum of 3 public hearings before each of the Planning Commission and the City Council. I'd also like to point out that an addendum to the Crow Canyon Specific Plan Environmental Impact Report is being prepared in accordance with CEQA and will be considered as part of the adoption process. Thanks. Next slide. So the draft plan that's before you tonight really retains many of the broad objectives of the original 2006 plan, but it includes a series of targeted revisions based on a direction provided by the City Council in October of 2017. And that direction was to refine the mix of land uses for a better balance of housing and commercial uses in the area that supports vitality. We also clarified and refined the development standards that will guide development subsequently under the plan. We improved connectivity in the village, particularly between the village core and other key destinations in the plan area and beyond. We also refined the proposed circulation network, and we looked at ways to further incorporate aspects of local history and heritage into the plan. Next slide, please. On May 19th, the Planning Commission made a number of requests that are shown here. The Commission requested that we enhance the vision statement for the Village Center Mixed Use District, that we provide additional information on the number of small lots and the details regarding specific incentives that could be offered to incentivize consolidation, that we look to include additional development standards such as the sloped height formula and standards around loading zones, and that we look again and provide input on the creek setback and policy requirements in consistency with the general plan. And then also we provide additional detail regarding the public improvement costs that are included in Table 8-1 of the plan. So staff and the consultant are working on detailed responses on those issues, and we will bring those back to you at a subsequent meeting. Next slide, please. Additionally, on the 19th, the Planning Commission made a number of requests that are more straightforward in nature. And so those have been added to an errata sheet that's included in attachment A of tonight's packet. They address a number of requests related to design guidelines, so requests for clarification around materials service lighting standards, private streets, and also some comments on minor edits to the allowed land uses that are in tables A1 to A3. So all of those requests are being detailed on that errata sheet that's in the packet, and we'll use it to update the plan ultimately upon adoption. Tonight, though, we'd like to hear further direction from the Commission regarding the design guidelines, the draft design guidelines that are in the plan. The guidelines included in section 4.6 of the land use chapter are recommendations on things that subsequent projects should do. But we'd like to hear from the Commission as to whether any of those items included as guidelines should actually become standards so that they're required of all development subsequent to the plan. Next slide, please. Additionally, we'd also like to hear from the Commission regarding the land use table that's included in the appendix of the plan. Note that all of the current established businesses in the plan area can remain even if there's a change of land use and zoning for them. But I'd also like to recognize that the parks and open space land uses need to be incorporated into that table. So we recognize that that needs to happen. Next slide, please. So finally, to set up for the discussion tonight, there's a couple of specific questions that we'd like to hear from the Commission on, and those are shown here. We'd like to hear, are the permitted land uses shown on tables A1 through A3 in the appendix, are they appropriate for each designation? Secondly, we'd like to hear, are there guidelines in section 4.6 of the land use chapter that the Commission would recommend converting into standards so that they become required for all development subsequent to the plan? And then if the Commission has any further thoughts on the renaming of the Crow Canyon area or other ways that history and heritage could be further incorporated into the plan, we'd like to hear from you on those points as well. And then last slide, please. Just a quick snapshot of next steps. So staff has recommended tonight that the Planning Commission continue the hearing until June 16th. And then other subsequent steps in the process will include recommendation from the Commission on the plan and the addendum, recommend that they be adopted to City Council. City Council hearings would then follow. Those are tentatively scheduled in August of 2020. And ultimately the process would end, we hope, with the adoption of the plan and EIR addendum. So with that, I'll turn it back to the Commissioner, the Chair of the Commission.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. So I think, like in the past, I think the best thing we should do is open to public comment first, and then we'll take it back to the Commission to discuss and deliberate and provide direction to staff and ask questions of Andrew and then Cindy. You know, so with that, Jen, do we have any? I know we have received some comments. I know we're going to handle some communications. You know, some written communications slightly different this time. So we'll handle those first, or I think you want to do that first, and then we'll go ahead and open the public comment. You know.
Yes. So what we'll do prior to opening public comment to the audience members, I just want to acknowledge we did receive one late communication item for this item from Jim Blick and staff, and this was provided to the Planning Commission in advance of tonight's meeting. So we won't be reading that aloud since it was provided to the commissioners. And for anyone else now who would like to speak on item 9.1, the draft Crow Canyon specific plan update, if you'd like to speak, it looks like we already have one hand raised. Go ahead and press the raise your hand button on your computer screen or *9 on your telephone. And Chair Alpert, I see one hand, so if you're ready, I'll go ahead and I can unmute her.
Okay, yes, okay. Looks like we do have one speaker. Yes.
When I unmute you, go ahead and state your name if you'd like for the record, please. Aparna, you're allowed to talk now. You're unmuted.
Hi, good evening. Aparna Madhareddy, Chair of the Open Space Advisory Committee. I'm a 23-year San Ramon resident. I know we always hear from planners that putting more people in less space It's good for the environment. It leads to economic development and creativity, creates walkable places. But in a post-pandemic world, we really need to start looking at things very differently, very carefully. The work, live, place premise that's based on density and lively interaction, that's likely going to be adjusted a bit more in the upcoming years. This plan is being updated from 2006. What is a likelihood of this staying the same over the next decade? People have seen and experienced virtual ways of working. That will shift the way people live and work. I was attending the budget workshop earlier this afternoon, and it was mentioned the population in San Ramon went down a bit. So I researched a little bit before attending this meeting, and I found out the California Department of Finance released new county population estimates. This is from December 2018, and it's showing a steady slowdown in the level of regional population growth. So the trend is shifting. My concern is when we allocate this kind of housing and build it, there will be not enough space left for sidewalks, air circulation, green spaces. I feel development, green space, and trees, those should not compete with each other. They should support each other. So this project can really become an opportunity for us to look at how we can make things more localized and self-sufficient, and yet have ample green spaces and open spaces to support the population. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out tonight. Okay. Okay.
Okay, so we will give it maybe another moment, see if anyone else would like to speak.
Okay. Are there any other speakers that wish to comment tonight?
And I don't see any, Chair Alpert, so if you'd like, you can go ahead and move forward.
Okay. Okay. So, okay. So are there any questions? First of all, we start with any questions or requests for clarification.
Sorry, through the chair, if you wouldn't mind just closing the public comment.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank
Okay,
you.
why don't we go ahead and close the public comment first?
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and open it up for questions of clarification for either Andrew or Cindy first? Okay. Well, why don't we turn to, at least the desired feedback then. The slide, I think it's packet page, the second to the last slide of the presentation, tonight they're asking for feedback on the permitted land uses on the table, A1 through A3. Are they appropriate for each designation? Are they appropriate? We could, open to feedback on how we want to do that. If anybody saw things that, stuck out in their mind as they looked through the tables, any kind of feedback that they thought, questions, comments, discussion items. Were there any in particular that you wanted to bring our attention to, either Andrew or Cindy, that, I looked at them quite closely. There was one that I asked the question about, and you clarified it for me, and that had to do with fitness centers and exercise studios. I did have a question about the difference between the two, the lines are blurring between CrossFit and gyms, but you clarified that there is a difference, and that, so I was satisfied with those, but those are the only two that came to my mind over the, prior to the last meeting. But was there others that people saw that were questions in their mind?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I do have some reaction to what the staff is asking. And again, I want to reiterate, I think this plan is very well done. I like how information is being presented, the formatting. I appreciate that a number of the comments that I asked be included are going to be included. With response to what Andrew had asked relative to, do we want any design guidelines to become design standards? I have three I would like to include. And I'm working now off of attachment A to the staff report, the errata sheet summarizing revisions. It's packet page 187. Items number 4, 5, and 6 are comments that I made at the last meeting, and I would like to see them be standards. And I'm wondering what the rest of the commission thinks about that. It's such a good idea. Nobody has a comment. That's great.
No, we're just trying to catch up here.
Yeah,
So
I did. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm trying to catch up.
Yeah. So Commissioner Marks, I'm looking at the attachment A. You're referencing to the design guidelines. Could you?
To the
help me out
staff
here?
report. This is the attachment to the staff report.
Right, correct. But
Okay.
the question to us, I think, was how did we feel about the design guidelines? And I'm just wondering.
I'm asking, should they become standards rather than guidelines?
Okay, thank you.
I had a couple of comments on what Rick just mentioned, 4, 5, and 6 on package 187. The potential problem I see is that, having read the government code before the meeting, standards are basically something that is objectively verifiable by reference to an external standard. It's 5 feet from a roadway. It can't be more than 5 feet inside the right of way, things like that you can measure with a tape measure. If they're subjective, then they're really guidelines as opposed to standards. The first one that Rick talked about was number 4, which is the cutouts. And he noted that they should be along the property on the streets as opposed to be on the street itself or the sidewalks, which I think is pretty objective.
Mhm.
The questions I had to do with 5 and 6. With respect to 5, buildings must be designed to have a distinctive base, middle, and top. The word distinctive sort of suggests to me that there's some room for non-reference. How do you, yeah, I understand what you're trying to get at is that there should be some demarcation between the middle, top, and bottom of the building. I don't know that that's a reference standard that can be put into objective terms, distinctive. I mean, that's sort of in the eyes of the holder. I just want to raise that as a question, whether that shouldn't be more of a guideline as opposed to a standard. That the same thing applies to item number 6, which has to do with the building articulation and specifically the roofs. Well, I agree with the concept of what we're trying to accomplish. When you talk about terms that say highly dimensional roofing materials that add to the overall architectural design of the building, to me, that is sort of a guideline. That's not something you can measure with a ruler or something like that. Now, maybe that in the architectural field, there are standards by which those specific items can be measured. But it just seems to me, just on the surface, that might be better left as a guideline unless it can be phrased.
How about the following? Cut the sentence off after the word roofing materials, and just put the period there. It's clear in building materials what are dimensional materials and what are the more flat materials. But I would get rid of then the comment that add to the overall architectural design.
I think if there's a commonly accepted definition of what a highly dimensional roofing material is, then that would be an appropriate modification.
Yeah.
Could I just ask a question? When we talk about design guidelines, and then we're talking about a policy LU 3.2, maybe I'm getting confused. I was thinking the policies that we would be talking about, whether they should be policies promoted to guidelines or standards, we would be talking about the section 4.6 of the Crow Canyon specific plan titled Design Guidelines, and that we would be discussing whether any of those should be promoted to standards. And then the 4, 5, and 6 are land use policies, you know, and that's where I'm getting myself confused. Are we, you know, that's right. I don't quite understand. Are we policies or design guidelines, or, you know, maybe we'll all get there at the same place, but I want to make sure we're, you know, what we should be
Sure.
talking about. Yeah.
Through the chair, perhaps I can just clarify. The bullets in attachment A, errata sheet number 4, 5, and 6 are actually in section 4.5 right now. That's the development standards section, where the paragraph begins, and I'm referring back to the original packet that was provided at our May 19th meeting. Packet page number 73 from May 19th. And I'll give you perhaps a second if everybody wants to follow along. But the first paragraph of that packet page 73 talks about, or rather the second paragraph, the following standards are applicable to all 3 street frontages in the VCMU district. And so the bullet points that follow after that paragraph are actually considered development standards required of the VCMU. I think the design standards that we were pointing to start on packet page 81 of the previous packet, where you have design guidelines identified DG1 through DG40. And there were some comments from the last meeting that the commission requested potentially some of these design guidelines may have merit to be brought into section 4.5 as standards, as opposed to just design guidelines. We did address in the errata sheet number 7 one of those design guidelines and a deletion to DG3. But the request this evening is if there are any of those design guidelines, DG1 through 40, that the commission believes should be brought into as a standard and into the previous section. That's the guidance that we're looking for this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Cindy. Okay.
Well, may I ask then, Cindy, is anything that I have requested so far tonight in conflict with what you just said?
No. So actually, if we were talking about bullets, item numbers 4, 5, and 6, those are already development standards that are in section 4.5. And so if there's further clarification about those standards that you'd like for us to incorporate, we can certainly do that. But right now, what the proposed action would be is simply just to include the additional text that was suggested from our last May 19th meeting and add those into the development standards section.
Okay, well, that's, I guess, what I was looking for. And I will agree if the rest of the commission does regarding Eric's concern after the words roofing materials, if that is a problem as far as the staff is concerned, I don't have a problem taking out the rest of that sentence. I'll leave it up to the staff.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Okay. So then
I had
yeah.
one other, if I can.
Please.
And to do this, I'm going to have to ask that people make a few page switches so you can follow me. It's relatively simple, but the land use diagram is on packet page 57, and that's the starting point.
So is that of the previous packet?
Of the plan.
Okay,
Yeah, of
thank
the
you.
previous, it's,
Got it. Okay, just trying to keep our page numbers. Thank you.
if you take a look at Hooper Drive and San Ramon Valley Boulevard. That whole essentially parallelogram is in the the commercial service commercial district.
Mhm.
I then am going to ask that you turn to packet page 76, keeping the land use diagram in front of you, if you will. And you can, if I'm going too fast, let me know. But on packet page 76 of the plan, it says maximum building height about midway down the page. And for the BMU district, there's no requirement, which is fine with me. I have no concern with that. For the PDR district, there's a 30-foot height setback or height limit. And again, I have no problem with that. That works for me. But in the C-SC district, again, going back to the land use map, this is where, for the last number of times we've met, I've said we need a slope height density requirement. As you go up the hill, and the largest portion of that parallelogram is essentially the Golden Skate site.
Mhm.
That is far taller. If you were to put a 40-foot building at the very bottom along San Ramon Valley Boulevard, it would have one appearance. If you put it up in the higher portions of that area, it's going to be too tall and overwhelming as seen from the street. And that is where I have said that in that particular area, you need to have a slope height formula that says that as the elevation of the property increases, at some point, the height of buildings decreases. Now,
The allowable height. The allowable height.
The allowable maximum height decreases. I understand what, the last time I raised this at our May 19th meeting, the response I got was in the multifamily district, they thought they had achieved that, and they did. I hadn't picked that up, but the staff, in fact, and Andrew had done what I had thought needed to be done in that area. But again, in the area that I'm talking about tonight, I really believe that having no limit on it is a problem. And lastly, let me turn your attention to packet pages 134 and 135, and I'll demonstrate that. That table A3, allowed land uses, allows office buildings of various stripes, including medical. And that's on packet page 134, about 1/3 of the way down. And on packet page 135, about midway down, it talks about parking facilities. Parking facilities are typically multi-storied buildings. They are large, they are bulky, and often not particularly attractive.
Mhm.
Offices are commonly more than one level to justify the cost, and often 3 and 4 stories. Again, at the lower portions of the service commercial area, that's probably not a problem. But when you get to the more elevated portions, that will be a problem. That will be a very large appearing building and out of scale with the area. And so, again, without trying to beat a dead horse here too much, I would like there to be a standard or a policy statement saying that establishing a slope height formula, explaining the need for it, the rationale for adopting it, how it would be implemented, and how properties subject to it would be affected. I think the plan itself has to have a policy statement, because if and when this gets incorporated into the zoning ordinance is only the implementation tool of a general plan or a specific plan. without specific policy direction, it's subject to challenge, at least stronger challenge. And so once again, I know the staff has the ability to do this, and I am grateful for the way they've incorporated a number of my comments into this, but the taller or more elevated portions of the C/SC district, I really believe, need to be carefully looked at in terms of how tall are the buildings going to be that we actually allow there. And bear in mind, if we are able to aggregate parcels, as is a part of this plan, and there are incentives to try and get smaller parcel owners to merge their parcels or at least joint venture, they're going to need to, from their standpoint, increase the bulk and height as much as possible. We need to have clear policy direction that says there are limits to the height of buildings in the C/SC district. So I would appreciate the commission's considering that, and that's what I have to say.
Rick, or Commissioner Marks, could I ask, you mentioned the PDR and then the maximum height listed there as being 30 feet, and you felt that was okay.
In the PDR district, which on your land use plan is the purple area.
The purple, right. And I'm looking
Goes higher up.
I'm just looking slightly, I guess that's to the south, where it like abuts Faria Preserve Parkway. That's PDR, and that could be, it could actually be higher in elevation, and that could be as high as 30 feet. And
30 feet in the PDR, wherever the purple is, that's the height limit.
okay, and so that doesn't need a height. So 30 feet at the very edge of that, at as high as it could be there along Faria Preserve, that would be a max. That'd be acceptable.
In my view, that's fine. In my view, that works.
Okay. If and then the CS in the commercial service commercial, the height formula is refresh our memory, that's a combination of height of the building and height of the land.
Well, you start at, in one way to do this is whatever the elevation is at, say, San Ramon Valley Boulevard and Hooper Drive, that's your baseline. Then as you go up every whatever, and that's where staff, every 10 feet of elevation or 5 feet, whatever the staff works out as being practical and reasonable, the height of the building needs to be reduced. And so you might end up with 30 feet, just like what you have in the purple PDR district, or maybe not. I didn't want to come up with a number. I thought that Debbie and the staff and Andrew would want to work that through. But the point is, as the elevation increases, and it does from San Ramon Valley Boulevard up to where Omega Road becomes Hooper Drive and where the Golden Skate is, and then all the way to the north toward Danville, the height is substantially different. And like I said, a 4-story building or a 3-story building at San Ramon Valley Boulevard and Hooper Drive is going to look one way in terms of scale. But a building that is 3-4 stories up by, say, the Golden Skate is going to have a very different appearance. Even if it's an attractive architecture, the scale of it is going to be just off.
Okay.
So I don't know, Debbie, Cindy, have I been unclear? Can I?
No, I think we understand your direction, and we are going to be working on that and bring that back at a subsequent meeting.
Well, I do appreciate that. And again, I want to be complimentary of this plan. I may have my own shtick on, what this stuff ought to be, but this is a very well done plan.
Just to offer a slightly counterpoint and small, but in looking at the land use the grid, the specific land uses. In the commercial district, it does allow for, according to use permits, something like a bed and breakfast or, lodgings. I'm just a tiny bit reluctant to say if I was, looking at that place where, for example, Golden Gate is right now, to put in a bed and breakfast, I'd want, all those folks to be able to have a great view. It's going to be like the last great view of Mount Diablo. So, yeah, I mean, that's certainly an exception, and I don't know that I'm advocating to have the provisions for the exception if there's a mechanism by which it could be challenged. But I mean, I also hear what you're saying in terms of the heights going up. So the question, and maybe Cindy, you can answer this for me or not. The edge of that district comes up to Danville, where there are actually houses farther up the hill. Are those considered, I mean, do we know how tall those are? It's kind of a random, and I don't really necessarily expect you to know this, but maybe 2-story houses, the area that I'm talking about.
Yeah. So there's a mix of housing types in that neighborhood, depending on which street you're going up north to. But that first left turn into the residential neighborhood, once you pass the city limit, there's a variety of homes. There are single family, detached, but there are also duplex style where they're attached, and they sort of have a 3-story element where there's a basement level, because they are built on hillsides, and then there's a first and second floor. So there's a variety of different housing types in that neighborhood, but mostly single family and attached single family.
Okay, so 1-story, maybe 2-story.
Yeah, I know certainly 2-story. I'm not sure if there are single stories there.
Okay, thank you. So it's just something, else to kind of.
Mr. Chairman, can I just respond a little bit to Commissioner Kuznick? I understand what you're saying, Gene, but the whole point of having development standards is to say to an applicant, these are the standards you must build to, whether you want your tenants to have a great view or not a great view, because everybody will have exceptions then. If you're trying to rationalize the development over 20 years or whatever the life of the plan is going to be, that's what we're in the business of doing right now. And so I take your point, but my experience tells me that to the extent that public acceptance of what we are doing is important, what we build and what we allow in terms of design, scale, etc., is really more important than the more functional aspects of the building, which we look at and which the building code looks at. But the public tends to judge these things based on what does it look like.
Sure.
And that's what's partly driving me.
Okay, fair enough. And, point taken.
So I think to kind of move on from the table, and I think we can continue to think about the table. And I think that's kind of the ask, I think, from what I'm taking from the discussion. And
Gary,
yeah.
Before you move on, I had one specific comment that relates to the table in 2 different places. There's a category called wild or exotic animals. And it would be permitted, as I understand it, in the multifamily residential district, and also in the village center mixed use, but not in the business mixed use. Now, I looked at what wild and exotic animals are. They include snakes, alligators, things like that. My view is that those types of animals should not be allowed in either of those 2 districts because they're really incompatible with multi-story dense packed housing. That would be my proposal for the table. Now, I had a couple of comments about what Rick and Jean were talking about. And I also had a couple of comments about the design standards versus design guidelines.
Hold the design guideline comments. I want to try and be more methodical on that one.
Not a problem. I just have to need to put my post-it in the right place.
Yes, yes.
I wanted to talk about the height limitations that Rick was talking about, and he has talked about this for quite some time on a number of different projects, and the idea of a height slope formula has been raised repeatedly. And I'm wondering, I thought that the staff was going to try and come up with some type of formula to apply, which we obviously don't have in front of us. But my comment really at this point is, if you look at the land use diagram that Rick was referring to, which is the May 19th packet, page 57, the PDR district is actually higher up on the hill than the commercial service area that Rick's been concerned about. And if you look, Rick had specifically talked about the Golden Skate property and the problem of building, essentially a high rise that far up on the hill. But there's areas in the PDR that are even higher up on the hill than the Golden Skate is, if you look at the slope lines on that page. And I agree with what Rick originally came up with, was slope height formula, so we don't look like we're putting high rises up on the top of the hill that are actually no taller than the ones along San Ramon Valley Boulevard. But I think that the formula should apply to the PDR district as well.
Perhaps maybe I can just
fire away.
just add some clarity here. So we are intending, staff's intending to come back at a future meeting with additional information on the slope height formula as it pertains to that commercial / service commercial and business mixed use. We can also include with that analysis what that would mean for the PDR district as well. So we can add that as part of our analysis when we come back. So we can have another discussion on appropriate heights. I also heard a recommendation from Vice Chair Wallace regarding wild and exotic animals in the residential zones. I'm not sure if there's any consensus or other comments from the commission, but if we'd like to get some direction on that so that we can perhaps incorporate that in a future errata sheet.
Yeah. So which page of, so that was, there's a footnote, and the footnote was, is that the footnote that says that you have to have architectural review may also be required, or is that referring to something else? S2 permit required, C section D62, 22. I don't have that. I don't have the zoning code right handy, but does S2 for wild or exotic?
Yeah, I think probably what was meant was, if you look on packet page 129 from the May 19th meeting, for wild and exotic animals in the VCMU district, it says S4. And if you look at the footnotes, that refers to the municipal code of San Ramon. Well, if you look at the municipal code for San Ramon, it refers to the county code. And that's when you find out that exotic animals include snake, alligators, and things like that, hawks. I think probably the reference in S2 on table A1 is probably an error. It should be S4.
Here's an issue that you might want to consider. And Debbie and Lauren may remember this. About 10 years ago, for some very strange reason, it became fashionable for people to buy pot-bellied pigs as a house pet. Right. And I can remember debates about whether or not that was an exotic animal or a farm animal, or appropriate as a critter to have in your house. If we're going to look at this that closely, it might be good to not talk about exotic, but be specific about reptiles or, rats or whatever it is that you don't want. Because I can tell you that the potbelly pigs won.
Also miniature goats.
Oh, there we go.
Well, if you actually look at the county code, there's about 2 pages of listings by species and genus in the species for what's considered an animal under Contra Costa County, which has been adopted by 3 different iterations into our code. If you actually look at that, I can see there's probably very few of those animals you'd ever want living in the condo next to you.
Yeah.
So if I could just also relate this back to the zoning ordinance, you are correct. The footnote that's found in table A-1, that's a footnote reference from the zoning ordinance. So there needs to be an additional footnote added to this table. That should be referring back to the municipal code, division B2, which is where wild and exotic animal regulations are listed. There's a registration process, et cetera, for wild animals, and certain regulations that animals are subjected to, or owners of those animals are subjected to in that zone. So there should be an additional footnote added to this table referencing the right municipal code section, but we do allow for wild and exotic animals currently in most of the residential zones. I'm just double checking here from our CCMU all the way to all residential zones. So we have not put any additional restrictions in our zoning ordinance based on density type for wild or exotic animals, but that's certainly something the commission could consider for this area.
Vice Chair Wallace, was your intent to open this up or just to make it match what we're doing elsewhere in the city?
When you say open it up, my suggestion was you modify the table to eliminate that species of animal from the VCMU, as we've done in the business mixed use district.
Okay, so perhaps make it different than what we do elsewhere in the city?
Yeah, there's a difference. I realize we have apartment buildings in San Ramon, but by and large, most of our population is in single family homes where they're on single lots where they're separated from the neighbor. So if you want to have some type of snake running around your backyard, that's one thing. But in an apartment building, condo, townhouse, whatever you want it, I think that's a different.
No, understood. But if this matches exactly what we do elsewhere in the city in multifamily units, your intent is to make this look differently than what we do in other multifamily apartment buildings?
Yes.
Okay. Understood.
I would be hesitant to have 2 different standards in the city because then we have a conflict with the Muni Code. So I think the decision should want to allow exotic animals or not.
Yeah.
I would prefer to simplify it rather than trying to create a whole new definition that will create confusion.
Yeah, I think I'd be inclined to agree with Debbie. I mean, if we ever want to take on the task of eliminating it, we should make that a standalone effort to clean all that up, but not just do this as a one-off under this project, under this specific plan. It just seems like the likelihood of us missing something by doing this as a one-off is pretty great, and making a mistake and missing something and creating confusion is greater than, the unintended consequences, I think, are too great if we just do it right here. So I'd be inclined to leave it the same as what's elsewhere in the city.
And to add on to Chair Alpert's comment, if you do a unique standard here or a unique selection of animals and you miss one, you want to add one back in, it's the 3 public hearings of each body in order to make that change. So just caution you to be very careful with how you go with this.
Well, the last thing I want to do is to arouse the ire of the alligator owning people in Summer.
Right, because you don't want one showing up at your doorstep.
We could have a might get a Netflix show all about San Ramon coming up, you know? Yeah.
It's funny. Okay.
Okay. Other comments on the table. I assume we'll all keep staring at the table and identifying things that we want to discuss until it's too late. But okay. The design guidelines, you know, Commissioner Wallace, you said that you had some discussion. I'm trying to think if there's a way to, this is section 4.6 of the plan.
Right.
You know,
so there are a couple of areas in the design guidelines, since we were talking about whether to make them standards, that to me fit their criteria for an objective measurement. On the first page of the, and I'm throwing this out for discussion, on the first page of design guidelines, which is packet page 81, DG4 says mechanical, electrical, and all other building equipment should be concealed from all public rights of way, pedestrian paths, and adjacent buildings. And there's some additional area language that deals with mechanical equipment. I would just say that seems to me it could be a standard, because it's pretty clear and objective, should be concealed. I'm just throwing, there's 3 more out just to throw out for discussion. It's not going to be the end of the world if they're kept as guidelines, but since you asked us, I thought I'd mention it. On this next page, packet 82, what's listed as DG9 says landscaped and common areas in new development should be maintained privately. That to me is pretty definitive about what should be. And if we're not, leave too much discretion on developers, that's something you might say, this is a standard, you have to pay for it. The other 2 had to do with the signage. At the bottom of packet page 82, DG17, signs above the first story should not obstruct views from inside or outside upper stories. And then also the next page, DG25, prohibit internally lit signs and signs with raceway channel letters. Now, to me, that's pretty specific, pretty objective. And so if you were looking at something to move into a standard, those struck me as being really the candidates, because much of the rest of the guidelines are, I think they allow for some interpretation. They're not as blunt as thou shalt not enter into the right of way with mechanical equipment. So since you had asked about possible movement from design guidelines into standards, I'll just throw that out for discussion.
Okay. Why don't we, before we come back and discuss whether we think these are good candidates to be promoted to standards, are there others, similar to what Commissioner Wallace said, that as you look through them are worthy of perhaps considering to be standards versus guidelines? Remember, standards are objective, not discretionary. DG3 is the one that we talked about before, had the distinct base, middle, and top section that was on the standard section on 4.5, and it's also here. Feels like it's in both places to me that we've talked about. I think that was
eliminated, wasn't it? In the errata chart.
Right. We took that DG3 out.
Yeah.
I had a question about DG10. DG10 had to do with the bioswales and rain gardens are encouraged. That felt to me like it was sort of the things that are always part of what's required by law to handle this kind of stuff. You know, it didn't seem discretionary to me at all, the way that planting, you know, the first part of it, you know, but I wasn't sure if it was talking about the same thing, you know, but you know, it may just be the semantics.
Yeah, I think the stormwater standards and guidelines allow for a range of things. And I agree that there's a bit of overlap. I think that this is just an emphasis on bioswales and rain gardens as a preferred method over others.
Gotcha.
But I don't think, I mean, yeah, it is, there's a bit of overlap. I don't, it's not necessary to have it in here.
Okay. And then maybe it's a overarching question about wayfinding and signage, but I'll just bring it up after we've see what other commissioners have as far as questions or comments about design guidelines versus standards. Okay. Other questions, comments, or items that discuss around design guidelines or standards versus standards?
I just had, I don't have a lot to add to what my fellow commissioners have already said. I think generally the plan is well thought out. I'm 95% there, 90% there. The remaining 10 to 15% are, well, that's not good math, 5 to 10%, is yet to be presented to us and is acknowledged in this report, but it's just specific to the guideline issue. On packet page 83 from the last meeting, DG 25, it strikes me as odd that the word prohibit is used in the guideline. Seems pretty, seems like a standard when you use the word prohibit. That aside, what is raceway? What is a raceway channel letter? I have no clue. Obviously, internally lit signs, that makes sense. But, and again, I would suggest that this is not a guideline if it says prohibited, nor should it be. It should be a standard. But since we're on the topic, what is a raceway channel letter?
You want to do it, Cindy?
Sure. Raceway channel letters refer to a type of installation method for signage. So typically, if somebody wants to install their electrical connections on a building, if they either want to save money or it's the construction of it where the material that they want to put the signage on is too thick to penetrate for the electrical connection. Oftentimes they'll create a box raceway to insert their electrical connection, and then you would attach the letters on that raceway. And it's just a method of sign construction that we typically discourage. Usually when you're planning a building, if you have the foresight to look at where signage would be appropriate, you could oftentimes eliminate the need for a raceway.
Aesthetically, it's not as nice.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks for putting it in my language, Lauren. No, I appreciate both of you. Thank you, Cindy. That's a good explanation. Although I guess the overall point is that probably should be put, since that's part of what you're asking us for, is that seems like it would be naturally part of a standard, not a guideline.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay. Okay. So since we're sort of talking about signs and things like that, was there ever a discussion? Because I remember hearing discussions, maybe it was at ARB meetings or something, significant energy on just master sign plans in general. The city is very interested in developing, you know, how big and what percentage and what kind of signs and how we attach letters to signs and things like that. And then I remember the economic element study talked about wayfaring and trying to create a common identity. Was was there ever a discussion, and I know they cost money to develop standards and guidelines for signage. Was there ever any discussion about attempting out of this process in some way, shape, or form to end up with a sign guidelines that would be consistent for the area out of this process, that as businesses come in and have to do a sign plan, that we don't leave it to chance or happenstance, that they would all have to comply with some guidelines or standards that look and felt consistent, you know? And I don't know how expensive it is to end up with a document that says these are the standards for signage. Was it ever contemplated to include that as part of the Crow Canyon specific plan?
I recall that there were discussions related to historical display signage or some additional informational signage that would relate back to the history of the area. And there is some language in the specific plan that relates back to the history of the area and encouraging that for new developments to add that historical context into their development. We have not talked about creating a sign package for the area that would have some sort of standard signage specifically for the Crow Canyon area. We do have a requirement in our zoning ordinance that requires that master sign programs be provided as part of new development. And so depending on how large or small a site is, signage may be more appropriate depending on the type of project. And so any master sign program that would be required as part of a development would make sure that signage would be uniform and address both commercial tenant signage as well as informational and directional signage on site. So we're looking at it from a standpoint of site by site right now with the sign program requirements, but we haven't discussed a uniform sign program for the area.
Gary,
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It's a lot easier and makes a whole lot more administrative sense when there is a master owner of a project and they have their own internal mechanism for dealing with sign consistency, such as City Center. Makes sense that they have a master program, or even within a shopping center. But when you have a multiplicity of properties like this that are owned by a variety of people, the best it seems you can do is anything placed in the public right of way, wayfinding signage. You could have a program that talks about materials and placement. For everyone else, maybe materials and placement, but doing a master sign program for, like on Beta Court, that would be very difficult, or some of the other smaller properties. I think it might be better if the max that we do is what don't we want to see, what materials in general are considered appropriate, and then anything in the public right of way, again, wayfinding. That's really, it seems to me, where our strongest opportunity is.
I mean, that makes complete sense. No, that helps. You know, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You know. Okay. So there were a few suggestions from Commissioner Wallace that felt like they felt like standards versus guidelines. Any reaction? I think we want to not leave until, you know, we've kind of given some clear guidance so that, you know, we don't leave it to you know, well, do they or don't they? You know, so the first one was DG4. Eric, you said it kind of reads like it's a standard already in your mind, you know, I think, or at least the first part of it does, you know.
Well, that's correct. I mean, it said should be concealed to me is thou shalt do it this way.
Mhm.
There's a lot of ambiguity about what's going to happen. Again, I mean, my preface with my comments was that, none of these are going to make or break the specific plan, but I thought since staff had asked for maybe some ideas of whether some guidelines ought to be moved into standards, that the ones I mentioned were the ones that seemed to fit the bill.
Mhm.
And I'm more than welcome to push back about whether these should remain guidelines instead of standards.
Through the chair, I might suggest that the feedback that's been given so far is good feedback in the sense that it identifies those policies that have some question about whether they can be standards or guidelines. I think at this point we have a list and staff can go back and assess them and bring it back at a future meeting for final consideration. But I think in many cases, what was pointed out by the commission is pretty clear that they are absolute standards in some cases.
Okay.
And we can assess that.
Enough said. Thank you. Okay. Lastly, any additional guidance for renaming the plan area for history and/or heritage?
I had a comment, and it really just has to do with where you put the words. To me, remember the core of our specific plan is the village center mixed use area. And I think you can retain the historical relationship to the original founding of San Ramon in the 1850s to call it Village San Ramon Specific Plan. The emphasis would be on village because that's what you're really referring back to. Again, it's not like a night and day. It's not like we'll all die if you don't change it. But I thought that it sounded better to me, and the emphasis is on the village part, which is what this plan is trying to create, is a walkable village style environment. And I just thought by placing the word village first, you emphasize that. Just my personal opinion.
I agree, and the only question that I had, and maybe staff can help, don't we have another development or retail center that is called the Village? That was a question in the south part of town. Everybody's looking puzzled.
Yeah, we have Gateway Shopping Center and Country Club Village Shopping Center.
No, the one over by Acosta and by the Walmart.
Yeah, Country Club Village.
Country Club Village.
Okay.
And then I think the park behind it was at one point the Village Green, and it's been renamed.
Oh, okay. Okay, maybe that's what I was thinking of. Thank you for clarifying that. So I like the idea of including the village in the name. So, for what it's worth.
Okay, that was a good suggestion, Commissioner Walls. Okay, so with nothing else, I think we can move on then, right? So I think at this point, we'd like a motion to continue this to our next commission meeting, which was June the 16th. Is that correct? Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Debbie.
And I'm going to kind of jump in for a little bit of housekeeping issues. As you realize, there's still quite a bit of questions that we were unable to come back with you tonight. The creek issue was one of them, and some clarifying things that we still want to work on. So yes, we do need to continue to June 16th. As I mentioned at the last meeting, public hearings. And sometimes 3 back-to-back work well, and other times issues come up and we need to kind of push out a bit, which is just fine. What I'm going to suggest is that the commission does continue to June 16th. At the June 16th meeting, we have a staff report that basically will say, continue the meeting. So there really won't be any additional dialogue on June 16th. If folks, members of the public do wish to speak, they will have the ability to provide any comments. But the intent will be basically just to give staff a little bit more time to finish up the document and come back to you in July, on July 7th. All your questions responded to, and we have a really great discussion that night, and hopefully the remaining items. And the addendum should be released at that time also.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So
Motion
with that,
So just the motion tonight is for only to continue to June 16th, and then we'll take care of the continuance to July on the 16th meeting.
Perfect, perfect. So
There.
with that, we still are going to have a motion to continue to June the 16th. So if we could have a motion to continue to June the 16th.
Excuse me, Chair. I'd like to refine the proposed motion just slightly. And it has to do with my concern about slowing the roll just a little bit here. Unless staff can articulate some prejudice that would befall the city if this bumped out. I know the plan is to get it to the city council in August. The city council got it, say, in September. I'm wondering if the staff can articulate some prejudice to the city as opposed to what I think are some valid concerns about delaying the final decision on this, at least from our body to the city council a little bit, to allow people to maintain some sort of normalcy in their lives. I know that in one hand, we have people who have more access to this process because we're doing it by Zoom. I think there's a whole swath of people that have bigger problems right now in their lives and are not tuned into this very important decision that's going to affect this area of our city for decades to come. And so aside from what I understand is some issues with the city recovering grant money, which I think is valid, and I want to make sure we don't prejudice the city's ability to do that in the costs associated with this plan, I would posit that we, yes, we do, we have to continue this to June 16th, but that the continued date not be July 7th, but July 21st, to allow at least a little bit of extra breathing room. And then from there, we can see if there's been any restrictions in the shelter in place orders. I doubt we'll be back in chambers, but who knows? But at least it gives us a little bit more to slow the roll, as they say. And so my motion is exactly as Debbie said, save for the fact that the continued date that will be announced on 6/16 will be 7/21, not 7/7. So I would invite any critical comments from the staff before, I guess, officially making that motion.
Thank you. My caution is going to be, we do have, since we were not able to hold public hearings early on in the COVID pandemic, is that we do have a backlog of projects that do need to get through the process. And so we do have sort of a tentative schedule that we've put together to address some of these projects that have been waiting to get to public hearings.
So can I ask how we're looking on the 21st? I know it might be a little early, but of July, I should say.
Lauren,
Before we talk about that, I just want to say also, there's no obligation that you take action on the 7th either. I mean, you can consider there now and continue it again if needed, or make whatever recommendations you see fit. It's within your purview to do that. Right now we have, I mean, I don't want to jump the gun on the summary at the end of the meeting, but we have the City Center EIR hearing coming up on June 16th as well. And then the second meeting of July, there'll be another public hearing for that project. We have the City Center Hotel project coming through. So we're getting pretty tight, and some of these projects are on timelines that need to move forward due to permit streamlining and other issues.
I think what Lauren, I would suggest that we just go the 16th and then we come back on the 7th with the information. And then if you want to continue beyond that, we certainly can hold more meetings. As I said, our first public hearing, 3 is the minimum that we have to hold, and some have gone much longer. So I think it'd be best to return to the commission with the information that we can provide you on the 7th. And then at that point, decide what your next hearing date is going to be. So we could then go into August for another hearing if you wanted to space them out a month or so to see how the shelter in place order goes. And then more information will be out answering all the commission's questions on July 7th, giving the public and you more time to evaluate that information.
Okay, that's acceptable. I just would indicate that at this point, I'm leaning towards elongating the process a little bit. I don't know how the rest of the commissioners feel about it. I'm just announcing how I feel about it. it might be of note and is related to the timeline here. If it would be good for us, if not also the public, to know if there are any funding deadlines we have to be looking at as far as grant money. I know from talking to staff that there may be some deadlines in early 2021 on applying for reimbursements for costs associated with this. So I want to make sure we don't prejudice the city in any way financially, although I don't want to get out over my skis and I want to stay in our proverbial lane and just deal with land use. It does, in my mind, factor into timing here also. So having said that, then I will make a motion to continue this matter, albeit briefly, to the 6/16 meeting with the understanding that it will then be continued to July 7th for further discussion.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Frank and seconded by Commissioner Marks.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. We'll go ahead and start with Commissioner Frank,
Aye.
Commissioner Marks,
Aye.
Commissioner Kuznick,
Aye.
Vice Chair Wallace,
Aye.
and Chair Alpert.
Aye.
Okay. And item 9.1 passes 5-0.
Okay.
Well, go ahead. Did you have anything?
Yes,
Chair Alpert, did you have something?
Okay, item 10.1. Item 10.1 is Crow Canyon Commons Fitness Facility, and I'm going to, fellow commissioners and members of the audience, I'm going to excuse myself for this item. My wife actually works for a competitor, the one that is also in town, 24-Hour Fitness. She's an employee of that, and after consulting with staff and in the abundance of caution and to ensure there's no issues of impropriety, I'm going to excuse myself from further discussion on this item whatsoever. So I'm going to, click the big X in the right-hand corner of my screen to unplug, and Vice Chair Wallace will take over the reins on this discussion. And I wish you all a good night and happy Zooming. Bye-bye, everybody.
Aye.
Bye, Gary.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we now have Mr. Driscoll for the staff report.
Yes, thank you.
Good evening, Vice Chair Wallace and Planning Commissioners. Give me just a moment. Let me share my screen for you guys. All right, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
So this is a use permit application for the Crow Canyon Commons Fitness Facility tenant. It is located at 3181 Crow Canyon Place, Suite B in the Crow Canyon Commons Shopping Center. The aerial photo here shows that location for the Commons Shopping Center. The arrow points to the location of the Suite B subject tenant space in the property. The general plan designation is mixed use. The specific plan zoning district is TCMU, Commons mixed use in the specific plan. A little bit of background. This subject tenant space was previously occupied by Orchard Supply Hardware. It was approved in February 2015. And in November 2018, Orchard Supply Hardware closed, and the space has been vacant since then. This proposed project would establish a health exercise club land use for a fitness facility tenant within the existing 36,330 square foot tenant space and an adjacent 4,441 square foot outdoor space. The proposed use would include a variety of fitness, weight equipment, small group training rooms, spa, therapy services, locker and shower rooms, restrooms, cafe, juice bar, and small retail area. The fitness facility tenant operator has not been disclosed, so the hours of operation and detailed class schedules, things like that, have not been determined at this time. However, the applicant has provided some late communication for the commission, and the applicant will be describing in further detail, I believe, specifics about the operation of the proposed tenant in a moment. The proposal also includes a request to increase the maximum allowed non-retail uses from 25% to 30.1% in the Crow Canyon Commons Shopping Center. Here's the site plan for a portion of the Commons site plan. The shaded area on the bottom in the middle shows the subject tenant space and also the outdoor area. The proposed first floor for the tenant with the weight machines and equipment in the middle, and along the perimeter, some of the rooms, therapists, drinks and snacks and gym retail near the front, the showers and restrooms in the back, and the outdoor exercise to the left. This is the proposed second floor or mezzanine in the existing tenant space. It's got the restrooms and offices in the back, and then the machines in the middle. The proposal also includes a modification to the front elevation. The top line there shows the existing front elevation. On the bottom, it shows the proposed, with the red boxes identifying the new storefront windows, 2 areas that they'd be providing to provide an active storefront. Staff has reviewed the proposal with regards to parking for this use. We've updated the parking analysis and provided it as part of the staff report. It includes the proposed use in all the existing uses and results in an excess of 100 uses in the shopping center with the proposed and existing uses. The applicants also included a trip generation assessment with their proposal. That looks at the number of vehicle trips anticipated for the proposed use when compared to the previous Orchard Supply hardware use. The results of that showed that there'd be 11 fewer AM peak hour vehicle trips and 46 additional new PM peak hour vehicle trips when compared to the previous use. And the city traffic engineer has reviewed and supports the methodology and conclusions in that trip generation assessment that's been provided. They've determined that a traffic impact study is not required because the proposed use would have less than 50 net new peak hour vehicle trips. The zoning ordinance also requires consideration of additional economic findings as part of this use permit to increase the non-retail land uses above the existing 25% maximum for the center. There are 6 findings. They relate to these kind of areas, relate to a high vacancy rate for the shopping center if there's a high volume of potential traffic for the proposed use, customer traffic for the proposed use. If there's a sales tax generation, if there's been a good faith effort to find a retail tenant, there's an active storefront display, and whether a denial would result in material financial hardship. The applicant has provided a detailed response to these findings, which demonstrate support for increase to the 30.1% non-retail request in the proposal. They demonstrate that there's a high overall vacancy rate in the center of about 18.1%, which is within the range of 15 to 20 that's been established by the findings. There's a high volume of potential customer traffic, about 142 PM trips, which is above the 100 plus trips established by the finding. It will generate sales tax. They've made a good faith effort to provide to obtain a retail tenant for greater than the 6 months established by the finding. The project plans include the new storefront windows I mentioned previously, and they provide reasoning why there will be a financial hardship. And they've also looked at alternatives to attract smaller retail tenants, and they've determined that it's not been feasible given site constraints related to significant grade change, accessibility requirements for ADA, and a difficult mezzanine location within the tenant space. So staff recommends the commission conduct a public hearing and adopt resolution 07-20, approving the proposed use permit with draft conditions. The draft conditions would require a zoning clearance be reviewed and approved by the zoning administrator prior to building permit issuance to ensure the fitness facility tenant the proposed operation with class sizes and schedules would be compatible with the existing tenants. And the conditions also require an architectural review of any facade changes to the tenant space. And I'll turn back over to the vice chair if you have any questions. If not, I can also introduce the applicant for a brief introduction too.
Do any of the commissioners have questions for?
I have one question. Ryan?
Yeah.
To your knowledge, have they signed a lease yet, or are they still in a memorandum of understanding or just discussions?
I don't know if they've signed a lease. I do know they'll be providing some more information about the tenant specifics shortly here with their late communication that they have.
If there are no other questions from the commissioners, Mr. Driscoll, would the applicant like to address the commission?
Yeah, we have Jan Sweetnam from Federal Realty to speak for the applicant. And Jen,
He's already a panelist, so he should be able to unmute himself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thumbs up?
Yep.
All right, fantastic. I just didn't know whether I needed to raise my hand. You guys need to let me in or what?
Nope, you're all set.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Good evening. Thanks, staff. Thanks, Ryan. Good evening, planning commissioners. My name is Jan Sweetnam. I oversee development and operations for Federal Realty on the West Coast. Just by way of background, Federal Realty is a mid-sized shopping center and real estate company. We've got about 24 million square feet of commercial space, most of it retail, a lot of it strip shopping centers like Crow Canyon Commons. I've been with Federal for over 20 years. Our head of leasing, Jeff Kreshek, who works directly on Crow Canyon Commons, has been with Federal for over 10 years, and he and I have worked together for 20 years. We've been doing this for a long time. Thought I'd spend just a few minutes talking about the retail market and kind of what's happened. In fact, there's been a lot of changes since we did the original Orchard Supply hardware lease back in 2014, no less what's happened recently in COVID and really almost on a day-by-day basis. Want to talk a little bit about the fitness as an anchor in shopping centers, and then just touch briefly on the economic hardship of not adopting the CUP. So with that, let me start with the retail market. And look, the bottom line is that there's too much retail space in the United States of America. Bottom line, it's just 24 square feet per capita, greater than any other country in the world. There's just not enough retailers to fill all the space, and there's changes. Some of the changes that are happening are consumer preferences are going in different directions. Consumers are getting much more comfortable buying their product over the internet, and that's creating a shrinking pie for the retailers. And this has been going on for a while. And we really started to feel it in 2015. And we saw it in a number of different ways. The tenor of our conversations changed with our prospects that we were talking to. We would often have 4 to 5 competing tenants working on a particular space. And that became 2 or 3 tenants. The time it took to get a lease signed went from 65 days to 85 days to 100 days to 120 days. It all got slower. We used to do 35 new leases a year. We do about 25 today. It's a new world. And I got to tell you, Orchard Supply Hardware really is a prime example of what has happened in terms of the dynamics of the marketplace. When Lucky closed, Lucky's Market closed in December of 2014, 10 months later, we had Osh open and operating. Osh closed in late October 2018, and here we are 19 months later, and we still don't have anybody open, and we're not going to get anybody open soon. We hope to with InShape, but it's going to take time to do it. And that's a function of the marketplace. That's not a function of in my opinion, Federal Realty's ability to get a lease done or not get a lease done, or Jeff and I are asleep at the switch. It's just not the case. We've been working this space very hard. Debbie in particular has been pushing this very, very hard to turn over every single rock, and we've been working on it. The good news, and it's not all bad news, the good news is as retailers have started to leave and shrink and reduce their footprints in strip shopping centers, good news is that consumers still have demand for other uses, and other uses have been filling the spaces left by retailers, and fitness has come in, education has come in, services, medical uses have come in, offices have come in, restaurants have come in. So the good news is there are uses that have come in and backfilled that space. And Crow Canyon Commons is no exception. We're not immune to it. And we have not done a new retail lease since we signed Total Wine in February of 2017. 8 of our last 8 leases have all been non-retail uses. If there were retail uses that were available that wanted to come in, we would have worked hard to put them in. We would have gotten some of those deals done. The market's just moved in a different direction. Now, those are the recent deals that we've done have been small shop spaces. We only have so many larger anchor spaces like the subject space that we have right now, the Farmer Osh space. If we just look at our overall portfolio that Federal has, we have 90 shopping centers and a number of other mixed-use projects. We have 11 anchor spaces that are currently in play in one form or another. 5 of them we have leases for, 3 of them with retailers, Target, Burlington, and Home Goods. And we have deep relationships with all of them, all 3 of those. And if we could steal Target and Home Goods from Bishop Branch, we would, but we can't. If we could attract Burlington to come here, we would, but they don't want to go to this location. So we're capable of doing retail deals. We just have not been able to attract them to this particular location. And the 2 other leases that we have that are done and under construction, one's a gym and one's medical, backfilling what was formerly retail space. Which brings us to, those are older leases. Those were leases that were signed 6 months ago, 8 months ago. The market's changed. It's changed faster than you could possibly imagine. And for the 6 unleased anchor boxes that we have right now, 100% of the activity we have on those boxes are either fitness or grocery. Jeff Kreshek and I are not aware of one single non-grocery retailer negotiating for a new store right now in any of the marketplaces that we have in California. Which kind of brings us to COVID. Seeing the headlines, we know how difficult it is for the retailers, the restaurants, merchants. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of what we're doing on a day-by-day basis because it's going to sound chaotic. But look, the stronger retailers should make it. All the weaker ones are going to fold. We're going to lose retailers. We're going to lose a lot of full-service restaurants. We're going to lose some theaters. We're going to lose some gyms. Vacancy is going to rise. If our portfolio was 95% leased yesterday, it's not 95% leased today. Whatever it is leased today, it's not going to be leased tomorrow. We're going to have more vacancies, and we've got to work our way through them. We remain confident that the market's going to get itself back to equilibrium. It's just going to take a while. So let me just talk just a little bit about full service fitness clubs as anchors. In the staff report that Ryan laid out, we're going to draw some great morning traffic to the shopping center. We're going to get some traffic in the evenings and the weekends, driving customers to the property, and you're going to create a lot of frequency of visits. And through that frequency of visits, we're going to get a couple things. One, we're going to get people more familiar with coming to the property and understanding what other merchants, restaurants, services that are available there, and they'll come back, and we'll get cross shopping. I can almost picture a younger and thinner Jan Sweetnam taking his kids to Code Ninja, getting a workout, picking up takeout from my family and bringing it home. It's going to happen. And in the case of Crow Canyon, the good news is there's a great complement in terms of the use, because we have a heavy crunch for lunch because we have a lot of quick serve restaurants that serve the offices and the residents that they're in the daytime population. And that's going to be a less traffic period for the gym. So it's good news. It's got a great complement there. And look, what works in different shopping centers doesn't mean it's going to work in San Ramon or Crow Canyon. But of our 90 shopping centers, 30 of them have full service fitness clubs. In about 3 months, 31 of them will have full service fitness clubs in them. So we find them to be a great anchor and they complement the food and drug very, very well. All right, so moving on to the economic hardship. In the staff report, there was laid out what the potential economic hardship is. The biggest one that we'd have in front of us is if we don't adopt this this use and this application, it's going to take us a long time to find another tenant. We're going to be without rent. We don't know how long that's going to be. Right now, it's difficult to find tenants to talk to. Almost no one is looking for space. It will be many, many months before we could even engage with somebody else. No less get ourselves in a position where we're trying to file for a permit. We've established that in our heads that there's no retail demand for this box at this point. We don't see that changing. We don't think COVID makes it any more likely that when we get to the other side of this, there's going to be retail that wants to go in this particular location. So we think now is the time to make this potential change. The good news is, look, the I-680 corridor is still it's a great freeway. It's a great access point. Crow Canyon Road provides great access to the community. San Ramon is a great community with great households. Crow Canyon Commons it's a great piece of real estate. Just the issue is that uses change over time, and we will continue to bring great first-class uses to Crow Canyon Commons. In this case, we just don't think it's going to be retail in the Osh box. We think that we can't make a market that's not there. We can only serve the market that comes to us. We think fitness is a fantastic use in this particular location. And for us in our shopping centers, it's proved to be a great anchor system that helps all the other retailers, and particularly the shop spaces. Respectfully, I ask that the commission adopt this application. So with that, those are my prepared remarks. And let me introduce Chandra Stevenson, the representative for InShape, to say a few words.
Well, good evening, Vice Chair Wallace. And I want to make sure that I'm not echoing. No?
You're fine.
Okay, great. Members of the Planning Commission, staff, and all those watching, if there are any, thank you for the opportunity to be with you this evening. My name is Sandra Stevenson. I am here on behalf of InShape Health Clubs, the proposed fitness tenant for this application. I believe that the commissioners were provided with our written statement that gave a description of the company and the plan generally for this location. So I thought I'd just give a brief overview of that and then open it up to any questions that you have. InShape is first and foremost a health club company, a fitness company, but you might be surprised by their approach to the fitness business. For example, their stated purpose is to make every member's day better. Whether it's a smile from the front desk person as you walk in the door, or encouragement from an instructor or a trainer. Their mission is to create places that encourage a sense of belonging for their members. A lot of thought is given to the design of InShape clubs very purposefully to be welcoming and inviting. The overarching goal of InShape is to motivate people to be healthy and happy. And of course, fitness is part of that. But it's also about giving members tools to build not only that physical strength, but also their inner strength and their confidence. InShape gives a lot of attention to healthy, positive programming, whether it's group exercise or nutrition tips, or even encouraging mental well-being. There is also very strong emphasis on family participation and on programs that serve members of all ages. So clearly, this approach sets InShape apart from others in their industry. And in closing, if I could offer just a personal thought. I've been involved in the fitness industry for a number of years, and I've worked very closely with InShape for over 13 years now. I have never met a more engaged, inspiring, dedicated group of individuals, from the members who work at each individual club, all the way up to the executive team. They put tremendous energy and passion into providing the best possible fitness experience for their members and for the communities they serve. So I feel really confident when I say that an InShape in Crow Canyon Commons will be a very positive addition. So before I yield to back to Planner Driscoll, I did want to just make a couple of points about materials that were in the submittal. The proposed floor plan, the two floor plans that were submitted were prepared by the applicant. And so they don't reflect InShape's plans for this space. No, we haven't finalized the space plans for this location at this point. They're conceptual and for illustration. Also, the proposed elevation shows 2 storefront windows to be added. And while we're not opposed to windows, the size and the placement of those windows will need to be subject to the eventual space plan that we develop. And I'm sure those 2 things will be handled through the architectural review and zoning clearance process. And then lastly, on page 3 of the project statement that we provided, InShape is requesting a condition to be able to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if warranted by member preference. And I'm happy to address that further in any questions that you might have. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I yield back for any questions. Thank you so much.
Do any of the commissioners have any questions for the applicant?
So I just want to make sure you guys know, I did mute a couple of you, so just before you speak, just make sure you unmute yourself.
Okay, there doesn't seem to be a big rush to the microphone. At this point, I will open the public hearing, and before that happens, Ms. Chavez has a statement to read to the public. Ms. Chavez?
Yes, thank you. So prior to opening public comment to audience members, I do want to acknowledge we have received late communication item from the applicant. So they did provide something to us, which we did provide to the planning commissioners prior to the meeting, as well as we did receive late communication from Ken Anderson and Linda Brewer. This was also provided to the commission prior to tonight's meeting. So at this time, if there is anyone else who would like to speak on item 10.1, Crow Canyon Commons Fitness Facility tenant, you can go ahead and do so now by pressing the raise your hand button or *9 on your telephone. And as a reminder, you do have 3 minutes to speak. When your time is up, we will go ahead and remute you. And, Vice Chair Wallace, I'll just go ahead, and it looks like we have 1 speaker. So I will start with Aparna. And you are unmuted, so feel free to go ahead.
Good evening. Once again, this is Aparna Madhareddy, 23 year San Ramon resident, chair of the Open Space Advisory Committee. I was listening to the presentation and I don't feel this plan justifies the allowance of the 30.1% non-retail land uses. I'm a fitness enthusiast. I always value the presence of fitness clubs in a community. But in a post-pandemic world, again, we have to reevaluate and see how things are going to pan out over the next few months. I recall the gentleman presenting that Orchard Supply Hardware went out of business in 19 months. This one may have a much shorter stay because of the plan as I saw it. And I'm going to specify a few of my concerns. A gym, when you have locker rooms and you have shower areas, again, that will have to comply with the health orders from the county. Social distancing will be used. Treadmills, cardio machines, spacing in those. My biggest concern is I love the fact this one has a massage area, spa area, but it is so close to the treadmills and the weight training area. It is noisy. I have been to spas like that, and you will not get clientele based on that. So sales revenues are going to be gone. Clothing, energy, protein bars, it's not going to happen. People have their own clothing stores that they go to for fitness clothing. Again, when we were sheltering in place, many people gravitated towards online fitness. And they have latched on to their favorite fitness instructors. Many of them are San Ramon residents, offering a variety of classes. So there's a mindset shift at this point. However, I still want, if this store wants to succeed, I have some suggestions. Adding childcare options, because a lot of families, they would love to work out, but they would need something like that. If you really want to boost sales, massage, that location is terrible where it is being seen. And you said this is not, this is just a conceptual thing. It's not the actual plan, but I would have loved to see that. But a quieter place for the massage area. Otherwise, you can have a blow dry bar for hair or a chiropractic location. My choice for this place, it is pretty big. I know it was a Halloween superstore. I went there. It's pretty big and deep. It can be a food business incubator production facility, a shared commercial kitchen, a retail event space. I mean, the options are there. We just have to look differently. But if it is going to be a fitness area just as it's proposed today, I don't think it justifies that allowance, and it will not do well long term. It may even have fewer vehicle trips.
Aparna, your time's up. If you want to wrap it up, you can go ahead and do that.
No, I'm done. Those were my thoughts, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other people that want to speak in the public comment section?
I do not see any hands raised. Up to you if you want to give it a moment, but as of now, we don't have anyone else who's wishing to speak.
Okay, going once, going twice. Close public meeting, public comment. At this point, we'll move on to comments from the commissioners. And hopefully you'll raise your hand so I don't have to call on you. Who wants to go first? Okay, Commissioner Kuznick, but you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you.
You're
All right.
up.
Okay, very good. So this is a question to staff as well. You know, could you, the number 18% of the vacancy rate is in our packet. So the question is, of that 18%, how much, or how is it calculated? How much of that vacancy is this single property when that number is calculated?
Don't have that right at my fingertips, but I can get back to you here. Just a minute here.
Well, it's a very big piece of square footage, and you know, if you have a high vacancy rate because you have one tenant that is very, very large, it is a little misleading to say that the whole center has a very high vacancy rate. That's why I was asking for the clarification, and I appreciate I caught you. you know, asking a math question without due notice. So, thank you.
While Ryan's working on that, if anybody else has questions, maybe we can continue the discussion.
Yep. Mr. Marks.
Well, I have both questions and some concerns. I'll start off with the basic concern, and I know that the initial speaker from Federal addressed this, but I still have a concern. We just spent a whole lot of time and money on a retail analysis. We spent, I'm going to guess, 18 months or more taking a look at the future of retailing in San Ramon. Where is it best located? And what changes we ought to make. And we were told, as you all know, that the sweet spot for retailing in this city is to the east of the freeway, Interstate 680. And this shopping center was one of those centers that, in fact, we needed to try and preserve. It was for that reason that we removed housing as an opportunity from this property. And in fact, along with other properties, sent the housing into the city center project. We're now talking about taking one of the larger spaces in the center and putting it into a non-retail use. My concern, and I understand what's happening in the online shopping world, but my concern is that for San Ramon residents that need commodity retail, not the kind of retail that we have in city center necessarily, but commodity retail, this is one of the better locations for getting it. Once you convert a space, it's very difficult to ever get back to where you were. And so a question I'll have of the staff is, how do you intend to track this so that over time we get from 31 back to 25%? It's going to be difficult. Spaces that are not retail serving today are likely to try and remain, even if a different user comes in, they're likely to try and remain non-retail. I'm concerned that of all the uses that I might want to see go into a center that is not retail, I'm not convinced that yet another health club is the answer. The counter to that I've been struggling with is, quite honestly, in this world that we live in today, which we did not anticipate or know about when we put the 25% limitation in place, is such that almost anything that will employ people and give them venues to get out seems like that might be a justification for allowing this. But I wonder, how are we tracking the 31%? How are we going to get back to 25%? I also am taken aback by the comments that, number one, yesterday we get a letter saying, oh, by the way, we're going to put a pool in, even though the plans don't reflect that. And then one of the speakers who represents the applicant directly told us the plans aren't accurate and the elevations aren't accurate. We typically approve plans that are included within a particular use permit, knowing that there are going to be some minor deviations through the building permit process and to get compliance with the building code. But I don't have a sense that we really know what the interior looks like. Not yet, anyway. But here's the bigger concern that I have. As a planner, I was trained to take a look at what's called adaptive reuse. What if? What happens if the use doesn't make it? Orchard didn't make it, but the building is deemed appropriate enough that somebody else can do something with the building. What do you do with an at-grade swimming pool? That's the outdoor area now. Let's say they don't make it. And let's say that other gyms aren't coming in. What do you do with a swimming pool there? Are we going to fill the swimming pool? Are we going to require that it be filled? That's a pretty expensive process. You've got to not just drain the pool, you've got to scrape out the pool facility, rip up the deck, fill it with soil, compact the soil, and then lay out whatever you're going to put on top of it. Are we driving away future uses because there's a swimming pool there with extraordinary uses that are likely to add costs that don't make it worthwhile to come into that shopping center? And once again, that shopping center is recognized in our retail analysis as one of our best opportunities if we're going to have not just services that meet residents' daily, or I should say weekly needs, but produce a sales tax. I know that there's a certain amount of sales tax that a health club produces, but it's minimal. Anyone who's belonged to a health club, and I have, knows that what they have there is minimal in terms of what they're selling. That's not what they're in the business to do. And so I would like to hear from fellow commissioners about why they are supportive, if they are supportive. Again, my concerns are not about this particular user. I've never heard of them before, but I have to assume that they're capable of building what they say they're going to build once we know what that is. I'm more concerned about, once again, we're losing retail. The whole point of the 25% limitation was we were getting overrun with non-retail stuff. And I don't know, perhaps the applicant or the representative from federal can tell us, if you vacate the site, what happens with the pool? Who pays to restore it, and how long a process that is? But given that uncertainty, the uncertainty of knowing what the floor plans are, and finally, has anyone talked to Total Wine about what they think about a pool being there? That's almost right by their entrance. I wonder, normally we contact a neighbor next door and we ask them, we show them the plans, we ask them what reaction they have. Do they have any mitigations that they might be interested in? Ryan, have we contacted Total Wine? We know what they think about it?
Staff has not contacted Total Wine as a tenant. They're not required to be noticed, but it would be incumbent on the property owner to discuss, future tenants with their existing tenants.
Well, I think the Planning Commission should, at least whoever's going to contact them. I realize from a legal standpoint, we may not be obligated to, but it just seems from a best practices standpoint, to put a swimming pool right next to them where they have a common wall with the area seems like the thing to do. So at best, I guess I'm just not sure yet where I am on this. I'd like to hear what the other commissioners think about the rationale for supporting the application.
Okay, so Commissioner Franks, you're next.
Well, Commissioner Marks, you raised some good points, and they are issues that I struggled with. At the end of the day, while I was close, I would come to more on the side of approval because the landscape has changed so much. And this particular spot has been vacant for, I think, about 1.5 years, if I'm doing the math right. We are now, and the better part of that period that it's been vacant, we've had some of the best economic tailwinds that we've had in a long time. And now we've got just the opposite and an uncertain future. And ideally, we'd all love to put some retail in there. And the question is, how long would it take to get a hypothetical retailer in there? I don't know. That's all speculative. I suppose everything could turn around and we could, have a retailer want to come in next month. I wouldn't bet on it if I was a betting man. And To me, it is in balance more important from a land use standpoint to activate the space than to leave it vacant. I'm not going to micromanage the operation or the reason behind the use, but I'm okay with the concept of this type of non-retail space in there. I'm satisfied that they've met the criteria under our ordinances to do that. So while I certainly recognize the points you've made, Commissioner Marks, and actually agree with them, I think in my balancing, I'm coming down in favor of it. Simply, for lack of a better word, it's the bird in the hand is worth two in the bush parable. So with that, I would lean in and say I support it.
Commissioner Kusick, you want to add anything?
I do. Thank you. I look like I was ready to get going here. So I would like to offer a counterpoint to what Commissioner Franks just mentioned. And that is, while I certainly appreciate the value of having a space filled, and in our household we deeply miss Osh, but nevertheless, I think of the many opportunities that I could sit and dream up for that particular space. Right now, in this time, the fitness business, I think, would probably be way down on the list. And I say that because as we go forward, and I think, health restrictions don't seem to be something that the general population we're going to be giving up anytime soon. I think the model of our fitness industry is going to be burdened for quite a long time. I mean, the idea that if you're walking outside on a street, you should have your mask on if you approach somebody. Well, what's the logic that you're going to stack up all these heavy cardio machines right next to each other and think that people are just going to come in and go like, well, okay, or to be doing this. I can't see this being able to pan out feasibility wise. And I think it creates a lot of like, let's get it built. Oh, wait, it went under. And I also think that it creates for me this sense that we're really getting oversubscribed in these very large fitness locations. There aren't, Club Sport is just up the hill at Bollinger. We've got a fitness place in the marketplace. We have 24-hour fitness. And it just seems like I'm not sure if that would be the use that I would pick. And I'm not sure it's actually as viable as we would have thought 3 months ago. And I don't see that going away. And I'll be happy to be proven wrong on that. That would be amazing and wonderful. But I don't want us to necessarily say that this is the right tenant. And I know this is not what we're being asked. But I think it failing soon would also be catastrophic to how the shopping center, and that shopping center is pretty busy on a day-to-day basis with lots of other businesses. So both for the loss of the retail and is this the right business, I'm leaning towards not thinking this is a good idea.
If I might
go ahead.
Mention to respond to your earlier question, Jean. The first floor area is about 10% of the floor area for the total center.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any of the other commissioners want to weigh in?
Could I just wanted to respond to Commissioner Kuznick's well taken remarks. I don't pretend to be an expert in the area of fitness. And I would, from a land use perspective, to stay in our lane, I'm not sure it's entirely within our scope to handicap the viability of the business. I could be wrong on that, but I would tend to believe that we have to give our applicants, as long as they can meet the requirements of the conditional use permit and pass muster with planning on these specific plans, that they will operate, they have the commercial incentive to operate a viable business. And while admitting that the landscape has changed for the fitness industry, that's an issue for the fitness industry. If I thought that we had a chance to have a retailer come in there, or if we were weighing, if the owner told us that they were weighing different offers or things like that, that would weigh differently on my decision. My best guess is that the existing retailers that are there, the restaurants, the Pete's Coffee, the pizza places, all those restaurants, they probably also would rather have somebody in that spot rather than nobody at all waiting for the ideal tenant to come along, because I think it would help them draw business. Now, is it a long-term viable process? I don't know, but I guess what I'm saying is I won't pretend to handicap them from the planning commission. You know, I think they're entitled to a shot because we don't have better options right now for that spot. So I guess that's how I would respond to that.
I would like to offer a hopefully polite counter to what you just said, Howard. This is not about the use. I would disagree it's about the use. If they were not exceeding the 25% of non-retail, there really wouldn't be much discussion here. It's they want special permission to exceed a standard that we have established in our zoning ordinance. And the decision is this something that you want to allow to exceed that standard? It's the 6% or so difference. They could easily say, we're not going to use the outdoor area, and maybe that gets them down to 25%, and we really don't have that much to say about it. It's the decision point for us is, for this use, are we going to allow an exception to the 25%? I would be, for instance, more comfortable in supporting the application based on local or current economic conditions if the outdoor pool wasn't there. Because again, to not only allow the exceptional additional, I should say 6%, it's I think we need an answer on what do you do with the at-grade swimming pool if and when this use doesn't make it. And it seems to me, at least, if commissioners are feeling as ambivalent as I am each way, send the applicant back. What are they going to do about it? What are the costs? How are they going to deal with that? Give Total Wine a chance to weigh in. They've got a business here too that we need to have some sensitivity to. But ultimately, for me at least, it's not the health club. I don't particularly think it's going to be that much of a driving force for the shopping center, but it's will I go over 25% for that and allow them to put in a pool that I don't know the future of if they do fail?
So would you support it if they withdrew the pool from the plans?
I'd be a whole lot closer. Again, I want to hear what Eric has to say. And I'd like to maybe see some back and forth with the commissioners, but makes it a whole lot easier for me because I'm not worried then about if they fail, we've still got a building that I think is relatively convertible to other uses.
Anybody else? Okay. I think that obviously the use itself, leaving aside the 6% overage on the retail, is a fit in the sense that it meets our specific plan. My concern is that we have now in front of us sort of conceptual plans that are contrary to what we've been looking at prior to today. Not only the windows, the frontage of the building, is we've been told, is not as represented. The floor plan is not as represented. And now we have a large pool that's next to the building and right next to Total Wine. What I think has happened is that for whatever reason, some major elements of this plan have been changed at the last minute. And we really don't know. I've had an opportunity to think about those major changes and solicit some input from members of the public, including those that would be most directly affected by the type of activity that was proposed yesterday. So I think I'm going to follow up what Commissioner Marks said. And I think that making a determination at this point is premature. I think that we ought to continue the hearing on this application to allow the applicant to come back and address the issues that were raised by the commissioners, vis-a-vis the pool and a few other things, so that at least we know much better what actually are we being asked to approve. I would also point out that the 24-hour operation, while it may be consistent with their business model, was not something that was brought up in the material that we got last week. So there's a lot of questions that were raised by the last minute submission that I think warrant additional time to flesh out. The applicant may well have very valid reasons and may be able to convince Commissioner Marks that the pool is a good idea and that there are ways to ameliorate it if it should go down. I agree with Commissioner Frank that the viability of the business vis-a-vis current conditions, while it's a concern, is not something that would be determinative of whether we allow the business to go in, because that's really the problem of the landlord and the tenant. We can't determine use permit by whether we think the business is going to be viable or not. That's up to them. That's what the market's going to say. But I do think that the footprint of the building and the way it's operated is something that really needs to be fleshed out a little bit more before we do a nay or yay vote. That's my view. Again, this is not a housing project. We're not up against any thresholds about the number of meetings or how fast we have to act at this point. So I don't think that we should feel pressure to make a final decision at this time when there are so many questions of a significant portion have been raised, and we owe it to the applicant to give them an opportunity to come back and explain it and see if all these issues can be worked out to ours and their satisfaction. So someone needs to say something, including starting with the words, "I make a motion."
I'll move to continue. I'll move to continue this. And I don't know what date to select because I don't know what the staff has in mind for all of our schedule, but to the next available meeting.
Let's go
Well,
date.
I'm pretty sure it's not going to be the 16th.
No, we'll go date uncertain for right now, and we'll just renotice when we're ready.
Do I have a second?
I will second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and second to continue the hearing on the application to a date to be determined. Do we have a roll call, please?
Yes. All right. Let me go ahead. I'll start with Commissioner Marks.
Aye.
Commissioner Kuznick.
Aye.
Commissioner Frank.
Aye.
And Vice Chair Wallace.
Aye.
All right. So it has been moved 4-1. Chair Alpert is recused to continue 10.1 to a date uncertain.
Okay.
Okay, so
Ms.
moving
Chavez,
on.
the
Go
next
ahead.
item, please.
Thank you. Item 11 is non-public hearing action items. We do not have any tonight. And that brings us to item 12, study session, commissioner liaison report and interest items and staff reports.
Does anybody have any liaison reports they want to enlighten us about?
No, I don't.
I see all the head shaking. So I don't think we have those. So I think that leaves it up to Lauren. Now, I went over my notes from the last meeting. And for the 16th, June 16th, you indicated the Crow Canyon specific plan is going to come up again. We are also going to talk about the City Walk project, although it's not clear. Are we going to be looking at the EIR?
It is a public hearing to solicit comments on the EIR, but it will also be an opportunity for people and the commission to comment on the project as a whole.
Okay.
So it would be both functions. And as you're aware, the Crow Canyon specific plan, as contemplated now, will be continued on the 16th to July 7th.
Well, that leaves more time for the most important thing that you told us about, which was Camp Bow Wow. So is it still on the agenda?
It is.
Okay.
So we'll be bringing that forward. And then also on July 7th, I'll just mention it's time for the election of a chair and vice chair and recognition of the outgoing chair.
All right.
Wow.
So on the
Been here
7th,
already?
besides that, we're also going to probably talk about Crow Canyon specific. Are we going to be talking about City Walk on July 7th?
We are not. We're going to skip a meeting to digest what we learn on the 16th. But we will be, at this point, we will likely be seeing the City Center Hotel, the project across from the City Center development on parcel 3A. We're waiting on some revised plans to be submitted, but assuming we get them in time, we'll come forward on the 7th.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Barr?
Not for this time.
Okay. Ms. Chavez, what's next on the agenda?
That leaves us at item 13, which is adjournment. So that one's on you.
Uh-oh. Okay. Unless there is some major league objection, I will adjourn the meeting.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.